Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at a game that was played in the early Title Tuesday, today, November 5th, Election Day in the great year of 2024. Now, the game in question occurred in the 10th round between two absolute heavyweights, the five-time World Chess Champion, Magnus Carlsen, and the runner-up in the World Championship, Fabiano Caruana. So, big matchman Title Tuesday. Both players are really heralded for their skills in chess, and let's jump right into the action. So, the players are on 7.5 points out of 9. The winner of this game will have a chance going into the last round with a chance to win, and let's see how it goes. So, Fabiano opens with the move d4, playing with the white pieces, and now we get the move knight to f6. After knight to f6, we get the move c4, and now Magnus plays the move e6, and Fabiano goes knight c3. Now, after the move bishop to b4, this is obviously the classic Nimzo-Indian defense from Magnus. Knight c3 generally forces black to either play bishop b4 or d5, trying to go for a queen's gambit decline. You can also go for the Ben Oni with c5, d5, but in general, it's considered to be a little bit dubious. So, Magnus decides to stay solid with bishop to b4, and now Fabiano plays the move e3. In the Norway chess event, which happened in May of this year, that famous streamer guy, Hikaru Nakamura himself, actually played the Nimzo-Indian with the white piece against Magnus Carlsen. In that game, he played the move 4f3 with the classic same-ish variation. If you want to watch that recap, I will try to put a link to that video below in the comments if you are unfamiliar with it. So, Fabiano decides he's not Hikaru, and he plays the move e3, and now we get the move castles. Here, Fabiano plays the move a3, we get takes, and now we have the move d6. Now, in olden times, back in 2020, there was a very famous game that was played in the Chess Champions Tour final. At the time, I think it was called the Magnus Carlsen Tour final between Hikaru and Magnus. Now, that game was in the Armageddon portion. Magnus playing with the white pieces, Hikaru with the black pieces. The game went c5, bishop d3, knight c6, knight e2, b6. I believe it was e4, knight to e8, castles, and bishop to a6. Again, ancient memories, but all of us top players have played these lines many times in our careers. So after takes, Magnus decides to play the move d6 here instead. We get the move knight to e2, and now we have the move knight c6. Fabiano goes knight g3, and the idea here is to play for e4 and f4, build this massive big white center here, and try to attack. On the other hand, you've created a serious positional weakness because you have these two pawns stacked on top of each other, meaning that if black can get this position with a bishop on a6 and a knight on a5, immediately this pawn becomes a massive target, and you love to put the pawn on b3 or put the pawn on d3, but because the pawn is overextended here, you can't guard this pawn. So after b6, Fabiano plays the move e4. Now we get the move e5 and the move bishop to e2. Now for Fabiano, it's a very easy, smooth position to play. He wants to castle, play for f4, attack immediately, and then open up the diagonals for these bishops. Magnus plays the move rook to e8, and now we get the move castles, and here we have pawn takes pawn being played. Now, this is actually a little bit of a mistake from Magnus, but again, it is a blitz game here. Probably doesn't want to get too low on time calculating deep lines. Very specifically, he probably was worried that after bishop to a6, something like d5, knight a5, and bishop g5 here, followed by f4, knight f5, knight h5, could be very dangerous, or even f4 immediately with takes, and then something like bishop takes f4, takes, and then bishop d3, and suddenly the B's are aimed at the king side, and the black king on g8 is very weak. So, after castles, Magnus decides to take the pawn. He sees a free pawn. He wants to capture it. We get takes, knight takes pawn, takes, and now we have the move bishop f3 being played. Now, I suspect that Magnus was doing very light calculations, and he simply did not realize that Fabiano could go bishop f3. He probably thought, well, bishop f3, I just take the pawn on d4. I'm up 2 pawns. I'm just winning the game. However, due to great computer programs like AlphaZero, we've learned that a lot of times you want to play for the initiative, and even if white has sacrificed a couple of pawns, it's a very open position, and in open positions with open diagonals, the B's can become very dangerous. So Fabiano goes queen to a4 here, and suddenly Magnus probably realized his error, as the knight is simply under massive pressure. If you move the knight to say e7, you lose the rook in the game. If you play bishop d7, after takes, I have an extra b on c1 going to this nice long open diagonal, and white will win the game. So Magnus goes knight to a5 here, temporarily sacking the rook on the a8 square, but after bishop takes a8, we now get the move bishop d7. Now, in this position, Fabiano still would have been better, but he has to find the very obviously human move, bishop to g5, sacking the bishop while attacking the queen. Now, probably thinking, what's that? Free b, right? Well, if you take the b, suddenly there's queen to e8, creating the classic ice skater checkmate where the king is stuck on the back rank, and you lose the game. So bishop g5 attacks the queen. Now you can't capture, and also you're still threatening to win the rook on a8. Now after black plays move f6, you're supposed to play another very obvious move, bishop to e3, attacking the rook while leaving the rook on a8 still under attack. And after bishop d7 and queen c2, black has to play rook to h4. If you take the juicer on c4, there's bishop d5 check, creating the wooden shield, but also winning this rook on c4. And after takes, now you're down a clean rook and you resign the game. But again, in a classical game, I think there's a very decent chance that Fabiano would find bishop g5. But here it's a situation where unless you sense the moment, you spend like a minute and a half and find the move. If you spend a minute and a half and you play something else, you're just going to lose because the time deficit will be too much. And Fabiano ends up playing this after a 20-second think. Last but not least, I do want to add one more line. After bishop g5, f6 here, bishop e7, queen c2, rook to h4, the best move. White can go g3, harassing the rook again. Now you have no squares on h5 or h6. Obviously, you still can't take on c4 because of the same bishop d5 threat, so you have to go rook h3. And now white can play another super obvious move, pawn to c5, sacking a third pawn in the position. And after takes in this position, now white can sack the bishop, and apparently white is better here. Honestly, as I'm looking at this makes me laugh, because if any human can find this, it would be very, very interesting. So Fabiano takes on a8 instead. Now Magnus goes bishop to d7, attacking the queen on a4 and the bishop on a8 at the same time. Fabiano plays queen c2, Magnus captures the bishop, and now Magnus is in great shape here. He has a knight and two juicers in return for the rook on a1, and as you can tell from the evaluation bar, black is completely winning, and yet again, Fabiano is going to have to suffer a very rough defeat against Magnus, right? Well, it is blitz after all, and mistakes can happen. So we get rook to e1. Magnus plays rook takes pawn, we get the move queen to e2, and now we have bishop to e6. At this point, Fabiano has a rook, but Magnus has a knight and three pawns here. You can also try to start pushing p in the middle of the board, and at any rate, it looks horrible. So we get bishop b2 here, trying to create some threats on the long open diagonal for the dark square b. We get rook to g4, and Fabiano plays f3. Of course, you don't want to blunder checkmate in one with, say, rook c1 and queen takes g2, simply ending the game immediately. So after rook g4, we get the move pawn to f3, attacking the rook and stopping the checkmate possibilities towards the king on g1. We have rook g6 being played, and now Fabiano goes rook a d1. Here Magnus plays knight to c4, activating the horse and attacking the bishop and the pawn while the bishop guards the knight. We got bishop to c1. Magnus plays h5 here. This move is dual purpose move. Black might want to go h4 and h3. Say we just make some random moves here. If you get the pawn to h3, g3, knight e5, suddenly there's some threats of a lolly checkmate on g2. There are threats of a fork, and white's king is very uncomfortable on g1. Additionally, h5 also creates a classic Lufthansa where the king can escape to the side, so you dodge all the back rank checkmates. So after h5, we get the move king to h1. Magnus plays d5 here. Now he decides it's time to start pushing p and creating the classic connect 4. We get queen to f2, c5, queen to h4, and now Magnus goes d4. Now at this point, he's achieved the connect 4. The game should end. However, this is chess, not connect 4, so the game continues, because in chess, the objective is to checkmate the king. After d4, we get queen takes h5, and now Magnus plays queen d5. Now at this point, Magnus obviously trying to trade the queens off the board. He has the connect 4. He's going to start pushing his p, and let's not forget that Magnus Carlsen is, of course, the premier expert at playing endgames. He has won so many endgames. He's known for it. The top players fear his endgame prowess. So after queen to d5, Fabiano plays move queen to h4. Of course, he does not want to trade the queens because he's simply going to get outskilled, and now we have the move b5 being played. Now this move is apparently a mistake here. Magnus should have played the move knight to a5, so after rook e4, you can go knight to c6, and the knight on c6 simply guards all the pawns on the chain, and black is doing quite well. Instead, in this position, we get the move b5 being played. Fabiano plays rook e4, and here Magnus makes an epic fail with this move a5. Now, I was already singing the praise of Magnus's endgame prowess, his abilities in the endgame, but the big weakness that Magnus sometimes has is he can overlook basic tactics. We saw this in the World Championship match in 2014 when he played against Vishwanath and Anand. He blundered a tactic, he blundered a pawn, Anand missed it due to the Magnus effect, but he does sometimes overlook tactical ideas. Now, this move is simply unconscionable in the position, but I suspect that Magnus simply missed the next move in the position, because after a5, Fabiano sacks the rook with rook takes pawn. We get takes, and suddenly black has a huge problem. The queen guards the rook. The queen is under attack. If you move the queen to say c6, now we get rook to d8 check. The king cannot go forward. We of course also have our classic 90-degree right triangle, and after queen to e8 and rook takes e8, it's spaghetti, checkmate, you lose the game. So you can't really take the rook because after queen takes queen, there's a rook and a bishop. You can't move the queen to c6. If you go to a8, it's the same problem, still rook to d8 check. Queen guards the rook, and now you have to sack the queen, and the game goes on, but you should lose. All right, so after rook takes d4, Magnus plays the move rook f6 because you have to give the queen one way or another. Fabiano captures, and now he plays the move h3. Now at this point, Fabiano should win the game because he has a queen in return for a rook and a knight, but more importantly, there's a massive imbalance in the pawn structure. Now, what do I mean by that? The point is white has a 3v2 on the king side. The bishop has some open diagonals. It's not a fixed pawn structure. An example of something much more fixed would be, let's say we got some position like this. I'm just going to set it up just to illustrate a point where you get something like this, and this would actually be a draw because the pawn structure is symmetrical here and white can't really attack. But when we look at this position after h3, you've got a 3v2. The bishop is open on the diagonals. You obviously have a queen, which is the most powerful piece in chess. The queen can go any which way she likes. So Fabiano should win this game. I mean, he is like what, number 2 or number 3 in the world pretty consistently. You know, he's got great technique. He's going to win. Well, not so fast. Magnus plays bishop to e6. We get queen to d4, rook to f5, and now Fabiano starts making some random moves. We get check, king h7, king h2, rook d5, queen h4, king g8, and Fabiano plays queen e7. Magnus goes rook d7, we get queen e8, king h7, queen f8, and once again rook to d4 is played. Now what Magnus is doing here is he's simply decided he's going to do the classic rook shuffle on the d file. He's going to shuffle the rook like the cha-cha-cha, rook d7, rook d6, rook d5, and he's going to ask Fabiano, how do you make progress? Now of course Fabiano can try to slowly push the p on the king side to create some weaknesses, but in a blitz game where the players are so low on time, it's not that easy to take your time and come up with a clear concept. So we get queen c5, rook d5, queen c6, rook d1, bishop f4, rook d5. Magnus continues to do the shuffle on the d file. We get the move bishop c1, rook d1, bishop g5, rook d5, and now Fabiano plays the move bishop e7. Of course, Fabiano does not want to settle for a draw here. He's playing as Magnus Carlsen. He has a queen for a rook and a knight. You got to go for more, and Fabiano also has to know that technically speaking, this endgame should be winning. So we get bishop e7. Magnus plays rook d7, bishop f8, rook d5 back. Magnus continue to be incredibly boring by shuffling the rook. We get bishop c5, and now the move king g8. Now here, Fabiano inexplicably plays this move queen to c7, and this is where we want to talk about one of the great things I believe in physics, which is known as the Magnus effect. Now, when it comes to the Magnus effect, what does that mean? That means that people make mistakes when they play Magnus. They overlook basic tactics. They think they see the boogeyman. You just make blunders, and this is a perfect example because when Fabiano plays bishop c5 here, obviously the goal is to shield the rook from guarding the pawn and capturing on b5 next move. So after king g8, Fabiano should just take the pawn here, because after knight takes a3, which is probably what he saw in the split second, you check the king, king goes, you win the horse, and now you've got a queen for a rook, and this is power overwhelming. So after king g8, instead Fabiano plays the move queen c7, and now Magnus goes back. We get queen c6, and here we have the move knight to e5 being played. Now at this point, Fabiano cannot really capture the pawn, although he does in the game, because there are some tricks in the position. What I would have recommended is to go queen c7, and after knight to c4 here, going bishop to f8, sneaking the bishop in behind and trying to create the classic lolly checkmate on g7. Fabiano takes. Now we get the move knight to d3, and already here it's getting a little bit out of control because the bishop on c5 is pinned here, and now you have to play queen b1 trying to pin the knight. However, Magnus goes bishop to f5. Now there are all kinds of fossils in the position. Fabiano plays bishop e3, and we get the move rook to e5. Now this is still completely winning for white, but it requires some precision, and Fabiano plays this move bishop d2. Now this move is objectively fine, but it allows this move rook to e2, creating the kebab on the second rank here. There's some pins, the bishop's under attack, and Fabiano plays this move bishop takes a5, which is a huge blunder and throws away the win completely. Now, what Fabiano needed to play was to move queen to d1 here, attacking the rook. Now if black takes, there's simply no tricks because the diagonals, there's nothing on this diagonal for the bishop to scope. And if you play a move like rook to f2, white can play many moves to win, but probably the cleanest in my opinion is to go king g3 here, attacking the rook. You can take this pawn later, and now the bishop, the knight, and the rook aren't really coordinating very well. And after say bishop g6 takes, let's just say rook to a2 and queen a4 here, white should eventually win due to the outside a pawn. So Fabiano instead plays bishop takes a5, and now Magnus sacks the rook with rook takes pawn, And here, unfortunately for Fabiano, he has to take the rook. Or you could go king h1 too, I suppose. But after king h1, not only does black have knight to f2, checking the king and winning the queen, but even rook to b2 here would be very dangerous, because after queen to a1, there might even be bishop takes a3, and suddenly your king is super weak in the corner. You have no pieces to defend the king. So Fabiano takes the rook. Now we get knight to f4, checking the king and discovering the queen on b1. This is why we call it the fossil, in honor of XQC, who came up with this great term. Now we have king g3, knight h5 check, king h4, and Magnus takes the queen. We got king takes h5, and after bishop to c2, Fabiano still has one extra pawn, that pawn being the a pawn, but with opposite color b's here and only 3 versus 2, the game is going to end in a draw. So Fabiano goes king g4, we get king g6, bishop c3, Magnus checks, we get king g3, bishop d7. Nice move, stopping white from advancing the pawn, but also spying the pawn on h3. Here we get h4, Magnus plays f6, king f4, bishop c6, king e3, and now we get the move king h5. Fabiano plays bishop to e1, guarding the pawn on h4, and here we get the move g5. Fabiano trades on g5 and goes bishop to f2, and now Magnus plays king g6. Fabiano goes bishop g3, we get king f5, f4 played here. White could just delay with bishop h2, but one line that I do want to show you guys, just so you have an idea of one of the basic endgame techniques, is that you can go king e6, walk this king all the way back to the corner, and then sack the bishop for the pawn, because in this position, the pawn, which wants the queen on the square, you can see it's a light square in the corner, and the bishop does not cover a8. Now I can draw a diagonal to a8, but those of you guys will notice the diagonal is actually on the dark squares, and the bishop can never cover this critical queening square. So Fabiano goes f4 here. We get takes, king e6, a4, bishop takes a4, and here the game ends in a peaceful draw. Now, for Fabiano, this has to be a huge disappointment. This draw took him out of contention to win Title Tuesday. On top of that, he had a queen for a rook and a knight. Everything was going his way in this game, and he still was unable to beat Magnus. And from a psychological standpoint, it has to be pretty damaging, as it's yet another game in a long list of many for him against Magnus, where he's had a chance to win, but at the end of the day, there's just that special Magnus effect, the Magnus factor, and Magnus finds a way to survive. For Magnus, on the other hand, obviously a big sigh of relief. Playing one of the best players in the world, he's able to survive even though he had a completely lost position, so that has to boost his confidence and make him realize just how afraid everyone is of him. So, a very exciting game played in the 10th round of Title Tuesday early today on November 5th of 2024. If you guys are not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash, I did that with one hand, I should do it again. Make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with some more great recaps in the very near future. Hope you guys enjoyed it and have a great rest of your day. See you soon. Bye.